Hi, everyone. Welcome back to She Blurs Podcast. Today's guest is Donna Conrad. Hi, Donna.
Hello.
Welcome to my podcast. Thank you for being a guest today.
It is my pleasure, and thank you for inviting me.
So, Donna is an award winning author of historical fiction. She's a journalist and an activist and a teacher. So, when did you first realize you wanted to be an author?
Oh, I think when I was a little kid, I kept wanting, I was writing stories, and my mother gave me a love for reading really young. And I always wanted to do that. But then I went through high school and college and became a high school English teacher for a while, and then put off the writing until the early 90s when I became a journalist.
Wow, nice.
So I did a lot of interviews with artists, Q&As and retrospectives of their work. And then thought, wait a minute, I can make stories about people historically, and started on historical fiction writing, and then went into House of the Moon, Surviving the 60s, which is about my life in Los Angeles in the 60s.
Wait, so you met Jim Morrison and did you meet Jimi Hendrix? Did you meet?
Absolutely.
You did? Oh,
I did.
wow. Wow.
Well, my sister, who is 4 years older than me, her boyfriend dealt drugs, and that doesn't mean he was dealing smack and all this kind of stuff, but weight, pot, acid, this kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just the light stuff. And to all the bands that came through LA. So that was kind of the segue into meeting these people and hanging out with them.
Oh, right. Wow. I kind of want to ask you, how were they? Like, how was Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison? Like, were they nice and stuff and funny?
They're completely different. I still say Jimi Hendrix is one of the kindest, gentlest, most insightful men I've met. One of the most, and he was exceptionally kind to me. Jim Morrison is another story, but he was a brilliant, if disturbed, poet that found his way, I think, into music. And I think the music industry was what kind of made him imbalanced, along with alcohol. He was, I always say, he was very, very cool and insightful when he was stoned, but when he was a bit of an ass.
I think there's a lot of people.
Yeah, he was a mellow stoner and a mean drunk. But it was a time when you could approach these people and you could interact with them. And if there were 3,000 people at a concert, it was mind blowing, that many people could be at one place. So I'd be able to go see people at remarkable venues like the Troubadour or the Ash Grove, where there would be a couple hundred people there. The Whiskey A Go Go.
Wow. I remember my grandma telling me stories when she went too. I was like, Grandma, you went to concerts like that? She's like, yeah. I'm like, wow.
Absolutely. What is the t-shirt? I might be old. I saw great bands.
So what inspired your novels, House of the Moon, Surviving the 60s? Is that what inspired it?
Well, and what inspired it was my brother-in-law. My sister-in-law's brother, doesn't matter. But I was writing about Mary Magdalene, which is coming up in the next series of books. And he is a drummer, and it was sitting around at Thanksgiving, and he said, did you really know these people? And I said, absolutely. And he said, well, you are history. Why don't you write about your life instead of someone that's been dead for 2,000 years?
Right.
And I said, that sounds like a good idea. And that was how House of the Moon was born.
Wow.
And Surviving the 60s came as I wrote about all of the very dark, disturbing, non-liberated things that went on in the 60s. And I realized I survived that, and it made me the person I am.
Wow, yeah. Like hearing stories from people that grew up in the 60s, y'all definitely lived it. Like, wow. Y'all went through it. I'm like, man, I thought my generation was bad or struggling or difficult, but y'all definitely went through it. I was like, Because my grandma has told me a few stories, and I'm like, how did you make it? She was
And where
like,
did
I'm
your
strong.
grandma grow up in the 60s? Where was she?
She grew up here, but she went everywhere. she was everywhere. I was like,
Yeah.
Grandma, how did you make it there? And she was in California, Texas, Florida. I'm like, woman's wild.
Back then, you could stick out your thumb and catch a ride.
Right, right.
You really could. And yeah, people. So my generation, and I was considered myself a freak or a hippie. We received a lot of press. We were all over the place, and I think we were meant to scare the establishment. Look at these people with their long hair and their, you know, drugged out all the time. We received a lot of press, but there were not that many of us.
Right.
And as I say, in my high school class, there was myself and my girlfriend that even went to protest, and we had a graduating class of 300. So we were a very well publicized minority, but it gave people of my generation a rallying point to say, we're tired of doing what we're told. We're going to think for ourselves, we're going to question authority, and we're going to try to do what's right.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So, what inspired the last, I always mispronounce this, Magdalene.
Magdalene.
Magdalene series.
Um, what inspired that was I met a woman who was a Magdalene scholar, and she started talking to me about this woman whose name appears many times in the New Testament. And the New Testament was written by some pretty patriarchal figures, so they didn't really include women much. And so it started piquing my interest. Who was she that she would have um, that she would have been mentioned so often? And women needed to be a pretty high stature
Right.
or be married to a famous man or something like that to even get mentioned in Rome. And so Rome is the ultimate patriarchy. And so it piqued my interest to find out, who is she? What did she do? What were the people like in first century Judea? Because what we have about their lives through the church and through Christianity is, I don't want to say distorted, but has filters and layers over it that met the church agenda. And so I'm stripping away those layers and saying, what was life like then? What would these people have been doing? And it's her story. It's the story of Mary of Bethany, who later becomes Mary the Magdalene.
Oh, okay. I've always wondered what that story was, because when I told you before we went live, about the Magdalene sisters, it was nuns who had a church, and they would always keep women who like got pregnant out of wedlock or
Oh,
got
the Magdalene laundries. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
they were
those.
around. Oh, yeah.
They would
So
beat them.
Magdalene in the 5th century got dubbed a repentant whore. And so any fallen woman was considered a Magdalene. And I think, again, this was a propaganda on the part of the patriarchy, that any woman who thought for herself, who enjoyed sensuality and sexuality, who didn't obey her husband in every way, shape, and form, it was a threat to the establishment, and so they locked her away. And this really started, I think, after the 3rd century, when the church really consolidated, and Constantine consolidated the Roman Empire, and one church, one God, one emperor. And so it closed down any type of free thinking. So you can see the connection between these two books, in that in the 60s, we were fighting to have our voices heard and to say, we deserve the right to speak our own minds. And I think that is what was going on in first century Judea when all the revolts were happening against Rome.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they were not successful. So Rome took over and slammed everything down.
Wow, that's amazing. Wow. Like I was asking my grandmother, like I was like, so is it way worse back then than it is now? And my grandma was like, yeah, oh yeah. She was like, we still have a lot to learn, but she was like, it was way worse back then than it is now. And I was like, wow, wow.
Well, women could not have credit cards in their own name. My
Oh wow.
mother, when I was 10 years old, needed my dad's permission to get a driver's license. Women could not own houses. So a lot of what we fought for, and a lot of the civil rights,
Mhm,
um, women's rights,
mhm,
and the right to question authority, those things we fought for are still present with us.
mhm,
Unfortunately, the things that we fought against are also present, like the abuse of
mhm,
power
mhm,
and the denial of due process.
mhm,
All of these things are still here. So yeah, there's still a lot more to be done.
mhm,
But I feel that the overall impact of the 60s was to
mhm.
improve life.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Who are a few of your favorite authors, and have any of them inspired any of your novels?
I would say we were talking a little bit before. Hunter Thompson with Gonzo Journalism. In the 60s, he wrote Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas
Yeah.
and the Hells Angels, and he was a reporter for the Rolling Stone um, magazine. And he was the proponent of the type of writing I do in House of the Moon, which
Mhm,
is to say it all, don't hold anything back. And it's part of what I teach at writers' conferences. It's
mhm,
real versus reality is one class I teach. How do you take facts and make them real to people who are reading it? And then also writing real, writing raw, which means you cut down to the bone and you write it what happened, but for the greatest impact. And so I think Hunter Thompson was a huge influence on me. Also, a lot of the beat poets. And I studied with Allen Ginsberg. And
Oh.
yeah, he insisted on you getting real.
Mhm.
So that was a huge influence on me
Wow.
for for that. And then historical fiction, Colleen McCulloch and Sharon K. Pinman, who write very
Mhm,
serious historical fiction that brings people's lives forward for
mhm.
us to understand.
Wow, I love this because I'm very interested in history. That's why I'm like all into it. And, like I always ask my grandma's questions. I'm like, Grandma, so what happened? Blah blah blah, and she would tell me what happened back then, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Get
But
that information from her because when she's gone, our whole generation's dying off. And
oh yeah,
so hopefully we have books, that show another one, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is a good one to talk about the 60s
oh
and what
yeah.
was going on by Hunter Thompson.
So does the movie reflect the book, or is the book just? I mean, the movie just lied.
Yes,
It does,
the movie does not have everything that the book has in it, but I think that Johnny Depp just
did a great job.
did Hunter Thompson perfectly. And yeah, it is pretty wild. His writing is different, but they included a lot of the quotes directly from his book in that movie.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna have to check out both the book and well, I watch the movie a lot of times, but the book,
Yeah, I know.
I'm gonna read the book. I'm definitely gonna read the book now. So, what was your hardest scene to write, and why was it the hardest scene?
Um, Probably some of the more violent things that happened to me as a teenager,
Oh,
and they were difficult to write,
mhm,
but they were also liberating.
mhm,
So, in the book, one example is a chapter called "Tryst Without Consent,"
mhm.
and it was myself and my girlfriend who were gang raped when we were 15 years old
Oh, wow.
by some college guys. So we talk about things that have changed and things that haven't changed. Well, the rape
Mhm,
culture hasn't changed a lot.
right.
As you know, and guys are still getting away with this, and women are still
Mhm,
blamed for it. But
mhm,
writing that chapter, I said I was a 59-year-old woman and I could not even say the word rape or watch any scenes that implied it because it was so traumatic. And I
mhm,
realized I had lived with that shame like it was something I had done. And so
mhm,
writing that chapter was very traumatic for me, but it
mhm,
got me over it and helped me to realize I was the one that was holding myself to blame for it because society
Yeah.
did. And that is over now.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It took me a while because when I told my story, my mom was like, "Well, why did you go out on a date with the guy you met online?" I was like, "What's the point of that question? Like, he shouldn't have touched me. Period." Like, but
Well,
now she understands.
well, and that's the problem. I had a short mini skirt on and some high black boots, and my girlfriend and I got in a car with 3 college students that we met at a party that we thought my sister knew, and she didn't know who they were. But it was our fault, for doing that as far as the law was concerned. And of course, we never reported it because then all of a sudden we had to explain why we were out and what we were doing.
Yeah.
And it would have all been our fault.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what they do too. Well, why was you out so late? What was you wearing that? I don't understand those questions. I'm like, what's the point of these questions? Why did they touch me? Number one, like,
Yeah,
that's the question you should be asking.
well, and
But
even nowadays with the whole college date rape scene, where the judge, I forget the name of the guy and the gal involved, but he said, well, we don't want to sentence him or find him guilty because it'll ruin his career chances.
oh yeah, I remember that one where she was unconscious and yeah, he took advantage and yeah, like.
And it's like, okay, yeah, whatever you do, don't worry about ruining her life. But let's get militant about this.
Right. I think in the book, that I read in college, they now have his picture in the book with him saying he's a sexual assault. I mean, a rapist, basically. Like, I'm like, wait a minute, they put this in the book? Like, yeah, they put his face, all the information, and rapist. I'm like, oh, all right.
There you
So,
go. Well, because to me, if you don't stop somebody, they're going to continue to do this.
oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
So
that's the difficult part to write.
Oh yeah.
And some other things that happened because my dad was he was paranoid schizophrenic and was pretty violent himself. So, and was also an undercover agent for the state with 2 teenage daughters in the 60s.
Oh wow. Wow. So what advice would you give to help others who want to pursue a writing career?
Write. Just write. It's keyboard miles now. We used to call it pencil miles. But continue, follow your dreams. And what I have on my computer is something I said years ago, decades ago. Belief in oneself is something fate finds almost irresistible. So if you believe you can do it and you work at it, writing is not easy. We need to depend on the muse, on the craft of writing. And it is pencil miles. Write and write and write. And then write some more. And
Man, I get sidetracked. But yeah, I agree with you. That's really great advice. So before we came on live, we talked about your writers conference that you have. So what types of things do you teach at your writing conferences?
Oh, well, I teach for other national writing conferences. And what I said earlier, I also teach flash fiction. I think flash fiction is an incredible stimulator for ideas. And flash fiction to me is like magic. You can finish a story in 500 words, and my books run 130,000 words. So I teach flash fiction. I also teach real versus reality, and some memoir classes. What Remains, which is how do you pick the stories from your life that are going to go in the book, and then Writing Real, Writing Raw. And they're all hands-on. Everybody writes in these classes.
Nice. So are your classes on your website or I'm looking at your website right now? Like, are they on?
Oh yeah. No, when they are, like the last conference I taught for the Pacific Northwest Writers Association, that conference is past. And so I don't have one coming up now. But with the Creative Academy, which is out of Canada, I do some classes for them, and I'm going to propose a couple. But it's mainly in the workshop, in the conference season.
Gotcha. Wow. I wish you would do like memoir classes online. Do you do that ever? When?
Well, I do through the Creative Academy, but they're not like an entire course.
Oh, okay.
You know, it's more a 1 or 2 week situation.
Oh,
So,
okay. Okay.
I,
Maybe.
people want to email me, they're welcome to, and I'm glad to talk writing with most anybody.
Ooh, I will email you then because I need help with my memoir. I want to thank you so much, Donna, for coming on my podcast today and chatting with me.
Well, you are so welcome, and thank you. This is wonderful. The more we can get writers talking to writers and being out there knowing we can do this, the better
Yes,
it'll be for us all.
yes, definitely. You have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, everyone. I want to thank you all so much for listening to my interview with Donna. If you would like to go purchase any of her books, I've linked the website below, but it goes to my main website and you can just see Donna on there. It's Donna Conrad, and you can just purchase her books and see what she has going on. She has like quite a few things on her website that you can check out. She does have her submission and classes and all that on her website. So if you want to go on there and check it out, then you can. I want to thank you all again so much for supporting my podcast and listening to me. And I hope you all have a great day and make great choices. Bye.